hand you over now to the lovely Katrina Crowe, who's the curator of the first Thought Talks. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you for coming in such numbers for this very important event. This is the first event of our second week of First Thought Talks. We're very, very pleased with our new venue, which holds more people than the one we had last year, which only goes to prove that the people of Galway are the most intelligent in the country. And we'll turn up in great numbers to hear smart people telling them things they want to know, which is what our motto is. So, endless conspiracy theories flood our phones every day, straining credulity, but with an increasing number of enthusiastic followers, and they range from the daft to the dumb to the downright dangerous. Last week we had an example of the daft, dumb and downright dangerous when a gentleman in Tallaght was assaulted and really seriously injured by a bunch of muppets who were certain about things about him that were absolutely untrue. So let us please try to disengage from Muppet philosophy when it comes to deciding what other people are or are not doing. It was really frightening to listen to the reports of what happened that day in Tallaght, with perfectly ordinary people standing by and watching and doing nothing to help. So we need to tackle this stuff at its base, and we have a fantastic panel for you today, moderated by Elaine Burke of the wonderfully named For Tech's Sake, which tells you everything you need to know about technology and associated items. And she is a great favourite here at Galway. We've had her many times before. We have Ciaran O'Connor here in the middle, who has written a number of reports for the Institute of Strategic Dialogue on Irish right-wing conspiracies and information, which have their own slightly leprechaunish twinge to them, to distinguish them from the broader universal madness that's going on. I always think most beautifully exemplified by Conor McGregor in that dreadful suit he wore to the White House, which one felt was about to burst at any moment, bringing shame on the country. Well, he already did. Cian O'Mahony is studying new approaches to critical thinking to enable people to distinguish between baseless, non-evidential stuff and something approximating the truth. There'll be time for engagement with yourselves towards the end of this event. But in the meantime, please welcome our guests.
Thank you so much, Katrina. I'm so glad to see so many people here today, and the government spies and the aliens in disguise that are all here for topics, conspiracy theories. And I did want to check quickly as a litmus test, does anyone here believe in any conspiracy theory? Big, small, silly, indifferent? Yes? We've got one honest person in the crowd. Oh, a couple more honest people? Because conspiracy theories can be a bit of fun as well. Like, we even had a laugh there. We made a few jokes about them and how silly they are. And sometimes we all like to engage in a bit of silliness and entertain a thought and follow it through and nearly play the game of solving the puzzle as well. And Cian, I know that you've had this theory that like positive conspiracies exist and they're kind of gossip essentially. Tell me a bit about that.
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting. We were talking before about how we always think of conspiracy theories and conspiracy theorists as people who are over there, when in actuality we all kind of engage in a bit of what we would, call conspiracy theorizing. Baseless gossip, rumors you hear online. We saw even a bit of this during the Kate Middleton photo scandal, where there was something amiss, but everyone came up with somewhat reasonable theories to somewhat outlandish theories for why the photos were doctored. And it was interesting to see how members of what we'd call the general public versus extreme conspiracy theorists engage in the same type of behaviors as what we'd stereotypically consider more kind of extreme thinking. So the thing is, there's kind of an element of fun and an element of curiosity with conspiracies. You're trying to kind of solve a puzzle. You're trying to think of oh, this could possibly happen. This is kind of interesting. And it's almost a bit of fan theorizing about a TV series you like, but in the real world.
Yeah, like a bit of fan fiction. That's interesting because I came across a very fun conspiracy theory very recently from Blind Boy Boat Club that Barack Obama is a massive Deep Space Nine fan and wrote fan fiction about Deep Space Nine that has been scrubbed from the internet because when he became a likely presidential candidate, that wasn't presidential behavior. And I love that. And I can see how Deep Space Nine fans would delve into that and try to uncover that. There is an element of fun there. And the puzzling aspect of it, I'm a big puzzler myself, so I can see that. And I think with QAnon, you kind of see people are playing a choose-your-own-adventure game in some ways and solving puzzles. And I know you know a lot about QAnon, Ciaran.
Yeah, and there can be perhaps a grain of truth to conspiracy theories, and they can be fun and benign and catch our blind spots. I support Celtic, so I quite often think there's a conspiracy with some decision the referee makes. You know? So we have our own biases, and I think that explains how we try and sometimes make sense of situations, and they can be, as I said, benign and totally genuine and well placed, but they can also go down some darker, deeper places. There are conspiracies and there are conspiracy theories. There's the Watergate scandal on the conspiracy side of things. There's the fact that ExxonMobil and other fossil fuel companies knew as early as the 60s and 70s that extractive industries were having a detrimental impact on the climate. There's the Edward Snowden and the NSA spying scandal. These are conspiracies that were uncovered and were falsified, were found out, versus the conspiracy theories that are fantastical narratives that require the complicit silence of, conservatively, maybe dozens or hundreds of maybe government employees or pharmaceutical employees, into the millions that might require something like the mass cover-up of COVID as, I don't know, a depopulation plan by mass vaccination or whatever it might be. So a lot of these roots are found in conspiracy theories like QAnon. QAnon, for those of you lucky enough to have never heard about it before, it started off as a conspiracy theory called Pizzagate. It's maybe it's a bit early to go into the harsher elements of it, but essentially QAnon conspiracy theory posits that the US government is run by child-sacrificing celebrity and political pedophiles, and that Donald Trump is the savior for all of this. So he is fighting the deep state. This started off on fringe forums online in 2017, 2018, grew more popular, spread across social media, and really went viral in that nature of the word because it was such a harmful, dangerous conspiracy theory. It metastasized across the web, and it blew up, and it has millions of followers, supporters. It's traveled across the world. It's become localized in different countries, including Ireland, and it also has perhaps gained a more credible image in something like a lot of the Epstein conspiracies, Jeffrey Epstein conspiracy theories of the last week in the news, but going back a number of years. So these things are all around us.
Yeah, but it's also like, I think what's key to a good conspiracy theory, one that goes viral, one that travels, is there is some kernel of truth that starts it off, because Epstein was convicted of all sorts of heinous things. I'm not even going to list them off. And he was a powerful man, and he had powerful allies. And Watergate really happened, and the NSA spying on people's phones really happened. Cambridge Analytica selling the idea of manipulating people through social media really happened. So, like, this obviously, the truth kind of compounds the falsities in that way, in this respect here.
Yeah, and all conspiracy theories, separated from the actual content and specific claims, are built on the same building blocks. That it is a theory that seeks to explain a phenomenon or an incident by invoking a secret or sinister plot that's been carried out by powerful people. So something like QAnon or something like allegations against Jeffrey Epstein take from all of those kinds of tropes. Here was someone who was incredibly well connected, incredibly wealthy, had friends in very high places, and there was lots of mystery around the social side of his life and who he was friends with, and perhaps who he gave lifts to on his jet, and who visited his island, and all these different things. So when Jeffrey Epstein was arrested and charged in July and August in 2019, a lot of the tropes were already in place because there was a very active, volatile conspiracy theory culture that had been born, I think, from QAnon, which kind of slowly migrated into the kind of Make America Great Again movement.
QAnon is like, it is a community in some sense, and people are contributing to it. Like, they're doing the information retrieval, they're trying to contribute to the research and piece things together. And when it comes to Epstein, you know, there's countless pictures of him that you can try and surface, you know, with different famous people in it. So I can see how people can get drawn into it. Cian, do you think people getting drawn into this are necessarily buying into the idea, or are they just going along with some internet trend, essentially joining a community that way?
This is where things get tricky, because there is this thing called Poe's law of the internet, which suggests that the internet has actually gotten so surreal that it's actually difficult to tell whether someone's being serious or whether they're being satirical. And this is something that was really interesting about the QAnon forums, like 4chan, where these communities are so entrenched in several layers of irony. You can't tell where people are just doing this as sort of a joke that they're taking a little bit too far, or whether they're really seriously endorsing these beliefs as something that could be true. It's kind of like, again, coming back to fan theories. There's a difference between people fully believing in this satanic cult that's being run by the underground elite, versus people saying, wouldn't it be interesting if this happened? Some people are kind of playing the hypotheticals and this idea of, wouldn't this be interesting, and trying to make the narrative fit rather than actually believing these things. So there's like an element of play when it comes to these conspiracies. People are almost like playing an online game of, how can I make this kind of theory fit with the evidence that's online? Now, some people, when you ask them, might actually tell you to your face that, no, I do seriously believe in this, but their actions would dictate that they're really just kind of like playing almost an imaginary game in their heads and going through the motions of like playing detective, but not actually seriously endorsing any of the things that they're investigating.
How challenging is that for research, though, as well? Because like even the idea that like some people might be making comments, like as you know, they do with trolling and stuff like that, or making jokes that seem really egregious and inappropriate, but they see it as, you know, it's nothing really. It's just, I'm making a joke on the internet about this thing that everybody's talking about. I don't actually buy into these ideologies. How do you, if you're trying to analyze how internet dialogue is feeding into this, how do you know the serious from the fake?
Yeah, it's challenging.
I think both of you are trying to do this in different ways.
There's no simple answer to it. It even comes down to trying to understand intentionality based on just the text of social media posts. You might not fully understand the nuances someone might be coming to it, or the fact that there's an element of play or fun in it for them. But there's also some other more explicit telltale signs. If they are making explicit claims that there is child sacrifices ongoing underneath a pizzeria in Washington, D.C., and they go to that pizzeria with a loaded gun, then they are quite deep down the rabbit hole. And trying to conduct research around these kinds of narratives online, sometimes they're very self-evident like that. But I think with something like QAnon, especially, like he mentioned, the kind of gaming aspect of it, one of the core taglines or slogans in the kind of QAnon community was, do your own research. So go off. So that itself is kind of empowering. It's encouraging for people to go off and essentially construct their own truth. And that is very validating, because you can go off and find sources to support anything, especially now today with generative AI and other things like that as well. But I think that gets at the dynamic of social media and digital platforms and digital technologies in all of this, where that's what makes something like QAnon so different, is how it's this web and this world has been able to be constructed and to spread. And in people being encouraged to share videos and do your own research, what they're also doing is sharing the conspiracy theory, helping it go viral and helping expand it beyond the US to Ireland, to everywhere else as well.
I wanted to talk about that as well, because obviously now we have a situation where it's easy to even just generate material, not just find it, but to falsely generate an image or a video or audio or anything like that that, you know, backs up whatever theory it is that you want to put out there. And it's because of the proliferation of generative AI tools being broadly available to people. And something that I've come across is that campaigns to create disinformation, so, you know, these are actually bad actors who want to create false information, put it out into the online spaces so that people get bought into this and take it as everyone's saying this online. They have come across the idea that it doesn't even matter if you debunk it, because they're actually creating campaigns to be ingested by AI models now. They're creating a campaign, and it doesn't matter if you write a story saying, I've debunked this, say the Journal does great fact-checking, Snopes does incredible fact-checking, but the fact that those words continue to feature together on a page is all that the model that ingests them care about. So they're actually not even just making these materials for people to absorb them, but for the AI to absorb them. Have you come across this as well?
Yeah, something my colleagues have looked into, that state-backed disinformation campaigns don't so much try to convince you of their truth or their reality, but they try to, something in the words of like Steve Bannon, flood the zone with shit. So they try and create so much content that this will then be absorbed by large language models, so that then if you go and ask some LLM what's happening today, this month in Ukraine, for example, then that large language model goes to scrape the available information about the search you've conducted. Then the available sources will be saturated in sources from this operation, and that's what the AI model will base its truth on, because that's the available information. It's a confirmation machine. It's sophisticated autocomplete, you know?
Yeah, and you're even seeing now that like even just the mere existence of AI imagery is changing how people are treating information online. So we discussed the idea of AI conspiracy theories or deepfake-related conspiracy theories, where there's this concept called the liar's dividend, where even just the fact that something like an image or a video can be labeled a deepfake or AI generated just introduces this idea that you can no longer trust images or videos online. Where if someone sees a video online of Donald Trump saying outrageous things online, that Donald Trump supporters will say, but that's just a deepfake. And it becomes a case where even though a very small amount of the information online or the images or videos online will be AI generated, just the fact that it's possible that they could be now has like sort of poisoned people's trust in what they can see and hear and read online.
I want to talk about that with you, Cian, actually, because I know your work is kind of looking into how you can kind of give people these skills of discernment. And obviously, like, you can't teach them truth from fake, because even that is quite nebulous as well. Like, two things can be true at the same time. It can be true that governments suppress information for their own agendas. You know, that is conspiracy-minded thinking, but it can also be true. And it can also be true that they do things that are correct and within the realms of working together and being collaborative and being community-minded. Like, both of those things can hold true in our heads at the same time. So is it about kind of teaching people that form of critical thinking, that it's not really black and white all the time?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I was doing this research in my PhD, we kind of ran into a tricky problem that we thought would be a lot simpler when I first came into the project. And it's the idea of, like, how do you get people to not fall for unreasonable conspiracy theories? And we had to ask the question, what's an unreasonable conspiracy theory? So we saw that there were many examples of conspiracy theories happening, as Ciaran mentioned, like Watergate, Cambridge Analytica. So we realized the problem is not like, how do you stop people from believing conspiracy theories? It's how do you get people to tell the difference between a conspiracy theory that be likely true, like Watergate and Cambridge Analytica, and one that's a little more unreasonable. And then we found that the way that people were measuring conspiracy theories in these studies were kind of either very vague and was highly context dependent. So they'd ask people in a study, how much do you think that the government is up to no good? You know, and it's like, it depends, you know, it depends on your government.
No one would be at zero.
No one would be at zero.
Unless they're a politician.
And some of the questions would be like, the government kills citizens for its own political gain. And a lot of respondents from our original study said, I think they thought we were US researchers. So they said, we assume that you're asking about the United States. We're going to answer that way. But in my country, this actually is happening, and this is documented. So we realized that's actually highly context dependent, and it was really assuming a cultural, like it had a sort of expectation of what culture you were in when it was asking you those questions. So we found that wasn't really helpful. And then the other way is asking very specific conspiracies, like, do you believe that vaccines contain like high levels of dangerous mercury, and pharmaceutical companies are lying about X, Y, Z? And we found that's fine, but if you change someone's ability to think about vaccine conspiracies, that tells you nothing about their inclination to believe in climate change conspiracies or flat Earth, etc. So we found that there was a problem with measuring this on a broad scale and measuring it on a very kind of specific scale. So we wanted to move away from that. And we found as well that the problem is if you try to debunk specific conspiracy theories, a new one comes in 2 months' time, and you have to debunk that one, and it's constantly running on the treadmill. So we took a step back and said, what's the actual problem here? Is it trying to debunk conspiracies as people are starting to believe in them and as they're coming out? Or is there something more fundamental we can challenge? So we're more interested in looking at what do people do to verify whether a conspiracy theory is true or not? And what kind of critical thinking strategies do they use? So we found ways then of teaching people things like lateral reading, so checking multiple sources, giving people general critical thinking skills and looking for ways of looking for logical fallacies. Very simple stuff. It only took us 5 minutes to show people these kind of infographics. And we found that it was better at teaching people to think about conspiracy theories. So we'd created a bunch of fictional conspiracies that had no relation to kind of ones that had come before. They were sort of completely novel. And instead of asking how much they believed in them, we asked them, why do you think this is true? Do you think it's true or do you not think it's true? But why? And people would say, oh yes, because there's a much more likely explanation here. You could actually see why people were coming to the conclusions they were coming to. So we started to see it wasn't more about what they were believing in, but why they were believing it, or not why they weren't believing them. And we found we got a much more nuanced idea of how people were applying critical thinking skills in these contexts.
I remember you explaining this to me, and it struck me how similar it is to actually teaching people around cybersecurity practices, because that's something I happen to know a little bit more about because it's part of my job. And what you want to do is not victim blame. So don't make it so that people think that they're stupid because they fell for a scam or were exploited in some way, because there's an entire industry trying to exploit them for cybercrime. And to make sure people are informed and that they are exploiting their critical thinking when they get a text of something that could be true. You could have a delivery on the way. You could get a text from your bank that says something. But trying to discern, like, is this one of the real ones or is this one of the fake ones? And it's about checking resources, going direct to the source, you know, not clicking the link that's in the email, maybe just calling the purported source of the information. So I find that really interesting, because the other thing that's really interesting is in cybersecurity, the technique is always about catching people in a moment of vulnerability, because that's where anyone can get caught out. It's not a case that the smartest cybersecurity professionals in the world are completely impervious to scams. Like, if you catch them in a moment of panic and you send them a text that's maybe about their kids being in danger, like, they could be weakened too. And I wanted to know what you think of that, Ciaran, in that when you're, you know, observing people who are getting caught up in some of the theories in Ireland right now, some really toxic things around great replacement theory repackaged for an Irish audience, and you can explain that for our audience here. What are the kinds of people that are getting caught up in this?
Everyone.
Yeah.
There's no one size to the kind of archetype of a conspiracy theorist. Everybody is susceptible. We all are. Again, the Celtic example, as I mentioned. People have an innate desire for knowledge and certainty, to know what's going on around them in the world. And conspiracy theories flourish in times of uncertainty, in crises, periods, a pandemic, for example, when there's a complete inversion of what was normal and what your routine and your world was.
Everyone is vulnerable.
Everyone is vulnerable. Yeah. Everyone is affected by this. There's no obvious immediate fix solution to what something like a pandemic or another type of crisis incident might be, but in its place, conspiracy theories can appear. They can offer a very simplistic solution. They might just even offer someone to blame, and that can be itself quite validating, quite helpful. So everybody can be totally susceptible to this. And in my field, there's a kind of before and after period which COVID constitutes, that I think we all probably know of someone, maybe family, friends, you might say they've got a bit more active on Facebook in the last few years, and they're kind of posting some stuff that doesn't really pass the sniff test sometimes, or they're just being hyperactive on it. But before the pandemic, we had silos of communities online, people who believed what you might call fringe things. But during COVID, lots of these communities, everybody moved online to such a great degree that there started to be a lot of crossover. And what we would call communities that were mainly influenced or shaped by a conspiracy theory mindset started to become the norm. I can see this very clearly in some of the data that we've gathered, that group chats or Facebook groups or Telegram group chats or what have you that started in May or June 2020 to discuss lockdowns, to discuss masks, and to discuss their own skepticism, which is totally valid around that. But over time, those spaces became very explicit, violent, maybe anti-vaccine places, and then moved on towards New World Order, and then after February 22 started talking about how the invasion of Ukraine was made up and things like this, and they've since moved on to lots of anti-immigration conspiracy theories as well. And that kind of gets at the question you raised. One of the most prominent conspiracy theories of the last 15 years is what's known as the Great Replacement theory. So this posits that in predominantly white Western countries, there is a systematic, sinister plan to mass import people of color, particularly black people, people from the Middle East and from sub-Saharan Africa, to replace native populations, because so goes the theory, these migrant communities who are imported into Ireland or other Western countries will be docile, will support the government, will be, obedient voters in essence. So this has very violent connotations. It's inspired a lot of terrorist attacks. The Christchurch terrorist attack in New Zealand in 2019 was carried out by someone who believed in the Great Replacement theory. And it's also become localized. So in Ireland, it gathers Irish teams, Irish tropes. If you spend any time online, you may hear people referring to the new plantation that's going on in Ireland over the last couple of years. That is an Irish conceptualization, because they're calling it the new plantation. They're drawing on heavy historical connotations there, and they're comparing the arrival of thousands of asylum seekers to the conquest of Ulster and other parts of the island in a couple of centuries ago. And with that, here's the kind of, I suppose, harmful or dangerous side of conspiracy theories like that, is that it serves to then justify violence, or at least hostility at the less explicit end. And it serves to create conditions where if people believe they are being invaded and that their town or their village is under attack, then it becomes easier to justify some violent action. So you see this kind of localization adopting Irish themes. QAnon has Irish colours too. People believe that underneath RTE there's all kinds of nefarious, well, I'm sure there are nefarious things going on in RTE.
Yeah, they didn't help themselves there, did they?
But more of the child sacrificing quality, which I don't think there is. But you see it adopt Irish colours, Irish tropes, and this is how, as Cian kind of mentioned, conspiracy theories are elastic. They're self-sealing. If you confront a conspiracy theorist with evidence, they'll just incorporate that into evidence of the cover-up. There's a joke that a conspiracy theorist arrives in heaven and speaks to St. Peter at the gates and says, "Will you please finally tell me what happened to JFK?" And St. Peter goes, "It was nothing, it was Lee Harvey Oswald." And the conspiracy theorist goes, "This goes higher than I think." So they have a way of self-sealing all the time.
Yeah. And they can, like you mentioned there, they can start from a space of good intentions. Like at a vulnerable time when we were all at a loss when it came to COVID-19. We shouldn't have been, because the science was warning against it for a long time. But we were at a loss and we needed information, and people were, with the best of intentions, trying to share information with one another. And I wanted to bring you in on this, Cian, because you had direct experience of seeing something like this pan out. You were in Utrecht when a shooting happened there. And even people who are trying to be well-meaning in sharing information to help people to get safe were clouding the information environment and making things complicated. And tell us what happened there.
Yeah, this is insane. This happened a couple of years ago. I was studying for my master's in Utrecht, and we had received news kind of early in the morning. I slept through it, but I'd seen it later that afternoon, that there had been a shooting that happened on a bus somewhere in the city. And what happened is, it was so unexpected, kind of the city really didn't know what to do and just told everyone in the university and everything to just like lock the doors and just stay inside and kind of wait for further orders, like SWAT teams to come out and everything. But what happened then is there have been reports about people who had seen the gunman and such, and kind of noting what you had said earlier, Ciaran, as well, there was some elements then of stereotypes and prejudices that came into the incident. So while it turned out later that the shooting had been an actual personal issue, there were insinuations that it had been a terror attack, and it had been essentially profiled based on the description of the gun person. So suddenly then descriptions of what was actually happening in the city escalated. Instead of being a lone gun person, it turned into 5 people. And then there was reports of 5 what was described as Arab men driving towards the university, and they were basically telling everyone that they need to evacuate XYZ on Twitter. To a certain point, the police actually had to step in and say, unless you're an official, or unless you are someone who has been authorized to make these claims, or a news outlet, please refrain from sharing any information online about this, because you're actually just sowing discord. People were just running around and they were making all these claims, and to be honest, very prejudiced and dangerous ones too, about what was happening in the city, and it was leading to more harm than good. So people were trying to warn their friends or warn other people in the city about a potentially active shooter, but essentially then were just spreading misinformation and had to be basically told online, you need to stop doing this, you're actually making your job worse.
And yeah, there's people are a part of this, and we've talked now a lot about the people participating in this, maybe, with bad intentions, maybe with good intentions, maybe inadvertently contributing to it, or getting sucked in. But there's systems at play here as well, which we definitely can't ignore. Because in the case of the likes of Twitter and things like that, there should be moderation in place to try and, I shouldn't use the word suppress, but manage that information during a moment of crisis. And platforms have historically tried to be helpful at times of crisis. Facebook launched its safety check-in features during big catastrophic natural disasters, and also then during shootings as well, which is very tragic. So they have shown that they have capabilities to stand up these solutions quite quickly and to work fast and innovate in these spaces, but there seems to be a lot less appetite to do that, and especially when it comes to content moderation. And I know, Ciaran, that's kind of it's probably a challenge that you come up against a lot, is how these platforms enable this, essentially.
It's such a massive part of the work that we do, yeah, and they're good examples, the ones you've mentioned, but that's also after the horse has bolted sometimes, in that Facebook or other platforms taking actions based on the conditions in which they have helped exacerbate or create on their platforms. We've talked about QAnon quite a lot. QAnon existed on the fringes, but it got a real big boost in March and April 2020 when it started recommending QAnon groups to followers who were interested in Christianity and guns and the red, white, and blue kinds of aesthetics in the US on Facebook.
And do you know, was that the recommendation system, or was it paid promotion? Or was there a bit of both, maybe?
Perhaps there was both. We certainly know it was recommender algorithms based on, because this is the fundamental issue in so much of this, not just with conspiracy theories, with scams online, with all of this kind of digital dystopia elements that kind of seem to shape our lives nowadays, is that fundamentally how platforms, social media platforms, are built to operate, and their business model is shaped around engagement and attention. That's what you hear about, the attention economy more and more nowadays, and engagement over accuracy. So what Facebook and other social media platforms want is more time spent online. They want you to stay online, reacting, and the most activating form of emotional responses on social media platforms are fear and anger. In the context of the 2020 US presidential election, Facebook turned on, I forget the specific term, but it was essentially a news quality index. So they started recommending more reputable news media to US Facebook users. And they found that engagement dropped significantly. There was less people arguing, there was less essentially polarization happening on the platform. Not too long after January 6th, they turned it off and they went back to the norm. So in their mind, less engagement is fundamentally negative for them. So sensationalism is central to how platforms operationalize and amplify viral content, and there's often nothing more sensational than conspiracy theories and these outlandish, fantastical claims based on things happening in people's localities, be it local or national. And that is such a part of the challenge, because every large social media platform has very clear community guidelines on what is and is not permitted on their platforms. But at the same time, we still see these kinds of problems exist. We saw it in the north in the aftermath of Ballymena there. We've seen it in Ireland in numerous examples over the last few years, that in that immediate space of a few hours after incidents, we see an information vacuum develop and people rush in with their own conspiracy theories or more just kind of common variety misleading or false claims, and time and time again social media platforms are found wanting because that sensationalist viral type of content is so central to their business model.
And I mean, quite often it's not just, you know, a random account filling that information vacuum. It is an account and an actor that has set themselves up as the truth sayer in this scenario, you know, the anti-mainstream media types. And not to discount or give them an out for their role in this, but there's an element in which the platforms have enabled the creation of those people with their lack of moderation policies, with their lack of like editorial control over what is said and incited to these people. Like Alex Jones essentially built a media empire off of being a Facebook personality. Like, the reason why he got, you know, done for so much money in the Sandy Hook case was because he had that much money built up to be sued for, and it boggles the mind to think that these are basically these are kind of like a new form of media. These people, they're not just random account holders.
Yes, and not only did he become massively popular, he also created the template for so many others to follow in the US, but also in the Irish context too. And you can call them conspiracy influencers, call them conspiracy entrepreneurs, because there is significant monetization opportunities to be made, either by actual subscriptions to something like YouTube or paid platforms like that as well, but also through flogging merchandise or flogging vitamins or whatever it's going to be. So there are financial incentives for people to create sensationalist, false, misleading content online because it gets eyeballs, and eyeballs is attention, and attention can be converted into a revenue stream, a way of making a living. And because of the model created by people like Alex Jones, we see the creation now of a kind of new industry. It is a new media, and that's what I kind of talk about in that kind of information vacuum, because in the old media world of 15 years ago, you had something happens, there's an incident, a criminal incident, whatever it might be. It takes a couple of hours for news media journalists to go out and establish the facts, create reports, get comments off reputable people, put out some report about it. Same for the Gardaí. But today's new media world, in that same information vacuum of a few hours, you have people who have their own incentives to create content that gets eyeballs. Eyeballs might equal revenue, and flood the zone with false or misleading claims or conspiracy theories. And at its present state, it is a battle that is currently being lost by the reputable legacy media and democratic institutions versus this new world of conspiracy theorists, permissive platforms, and people who are very prone to these kinds of claims as well. And
you've even observed how around the time of the Carlow shooting, or in response to that, Gardaí has actually changed how they release information.
Yeah, there's a new practice by the Gardaí, and I think they've either adopted it from the UK police, or they're both doing it in tandem. But what you see now more and more from the Gardaí is that after an incident in which there may be, the rumour mill is active online, they're now putting out statements and kind of operating like a newsroom themselves, because they're putting out the facts that they've established about the incident. Often it involves the ethnicity of the person, the suspect, to try and quell rumours or combat misinformation. And this is just unprecedented by the Gardaí. In the incident in Carlow, for example, happened around 4 or 5 o'clock on that day, when the person opened fire in the shopping centre and later died by suicide outside of it. The incident happened around 5 or 6 p.m. By midday the next day, the Gardaí had put out 4 separate statements with details, very specific details that just wasn't the norm for the Gardaí, to try and quell the rumour mill, because online there was people trying to fill in the blanks saying this is terrorism or this is A, B or C, to confirm their own and reinforce their own worldviews and put that out into the world for their own, be it ideological or economic incentives online. And we're all left to pick up the pieces of how this stuff is kind of, as I said, metastasizing and spreading virally so quickly before the institutional checks and balances that we've traditionally relied upon can be activated.
And it's like, it makes sense to me that the Gardaí would kind of have a newsroom type response to this, because it is a communications challenge. Now, there's an element of that that might even feed into conspiracy theories. If the Gardaí has a newsroom, how are they manipulating information and da-da-da? But there is a communications challenge here, and it is a huge one. Because it's also, I do think, and I hold my hands up and say as a member of the media, that we have a problem here in how we are presenting information and how we're delivering information to people. And in some ways, we are being perhaps too responsive to an amped up demand for immediate information and details that we actually probably don't have the privilege of access to. Because if an ongoing investigation is taking place, releasing information too early could have massive ramifications and is irresponsible reporting. But newsrooms feel under pressure to deliver that information. And in their argument, they will think, like, this is what people want. We are giving people what they want. But, and I don't want to sound too big brothery here, but maybe giving people what they want is not right here. Like, our expectations have been inflated in a digital world that everything should be on demand and we should have access to all information, and it also should be free and it should be available to us immediately. I think those expectations need to be managed a bit for all of us. And I think as well, Cian, I really want to bring you a bit in on this, because I also have issues with science reporting. As well as there being a bit of a media literacy problem, I think science literacy is a huge problem, and science reporting, because it's often not done by science journalists, especially now, is really challenging. And coming from the perspective of a researcher, I'm sure you've seen this.
Yeah, it's interesting because I kind of got my first taste of this when we started publishing some of our experimental papers. And we saw that there was kind of a game of telephone that took place between yourself and then the journal that would be doing a press release on your paper. And then other magazines would come in and sort of take the summary that was made by the journal and write. They wouldn't read the paper itself. They would actually just do their own interpretation of what the abstract said. And what was funny is you'd see, depending on people's political allegiances too, you'd see that their interpretation of your paper would change. So I corresponded with somebody from Scientific American who had actually read the paper and such, and had come out and said that one of her studies had showed that there were a handful of ways that were effective at helping people combat unfounded conspiracy theories. Breitbart did an article on it and said that there are no ways to combat conspiracy theories. And they had very evidently taken the summarized press release and then just like didn't read the paper at all and did their own interpretation of it. So you could see, depending on what people wanted to get out of the paper, they interpreted it in completely different ways, like on different ends of the spectrum, even though it was the exact same paper. But some people who wanted to make it look really good said like, oh, these are all the ways you can solve conspiracy theories, which is not what we were saying. And then other people were saying, there is no way in hell you can actually combat conspiracy theories, which was also not what we were saying. So it was very funny how in even the way we wanted to present the information, sometimes you'd kind of present the best bits, your greatest hits of what you did in the research to kind of make it sound interesting. Then people would interpret that, and then they'd hand it on to whoever else would be covering it. And by the time someone else had actually covered the study, there was a whole different interpretation of what we had done. So it was interesting to see how so far along the line, information could have been changed, the interpretation of the information could have been changed as well.
Yeah, and it's a real challenge as well. And it's like, it's really funny because you see so much reporting that takes the line of science says X, Y, Z, and it's one paper. And if you know literally anything about science, you know no one paper is ever going to be that conclusive about anything.
And some people would get mad at you too. Like sometimes I was doing speaking to some researcher from who wanted to do an article on the study, and it was my first time doing this, so I was very hesitant to, like, you know, run with the wind with any of our interpretations. So they said, should we put all this in schools right now? And I said, well, we might have to do 1 or 2 studies before we do any of that. And they're like, and what about this? And I was like, oh, I'm not sure. They're like, you don't seem to be sure about anything. Like they wanted their one soundbite, their one little like tagline to say, this is the one way you can stop conspiracy theories, or this is the one element that predicts conspiracy theorists. When that's not really how science works. And there's kind of this tension between researchers who don't want to run with the wind with their findings and try to give as nuanced of a conclusion as possible to what they've done, versus people in media, which is very understandable. They want to have something that's going to garner attention. They want that one kind of question or that one headline that will really put eyes on the page. And more often than not, I find that those two are at odds with one another because we try to be hesitant about kind of running to the wind with any sort of conclusions about our studies. We like the fact that like our research is a bit slow. It takes time to actually come to any conclusive findings. While like I find media interpretation really wants that kind of one tagline, and I find those two really sometimes don't work well with each other.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, all good science, like good investigative work, it's slow, it's methodological, and it's more than likely going to come to the conclusion that a lot of options are actually valid here. It's not exciting, things aren't wrapped up in a neat little bow, and also there might be open-ended things that couldn't be covered by the research, by the investigation. There were limitations. Like, that's the reality, but that doesn't make for great storytelling, unfortunately. But I do want to, before we come to the end here, definitely want to leave people with techniques like what you were talking about. We've kind of touched on how to defend ourselves, like to be more critical, to look at sources, to cross-reference. But people might be experiencing what we've touched on here, where they may have friends or family who are saying some things that they think might be falling down this rabbit hole of conspiracy theory. And Cian, let's talk about your research into this, because we talked about gaming kind of being an element that wraps people up in this, and you're looking at using that as a way to bring people out of this. Yeah,
exactly. So we were really interested we ran a couple of experiments, as I was mentioning before, on how to teach people critical thinking skills. But these were sort of kind of boring posters that we'd sort of paid people to do in a study, and we were saying, realistically speaking, how likely are people to actually do this in real life when we're not paying them to do the study? So we tried to package everything we learned in our research into something that was a little more fun and engaging. And something we noticed is that, as Ciaran had been mentioning earlier, that there's a sort of gaming element to conspiracy theories. It's kind of like trying to solve a puzzle or like play detective. So we were saying, is there a way we could actually take that kind of fun game nature and package everything we've learned about critical thinking into that? So we were having a chat one day and we were thinking, what would it be like to be a PR assistant for, I don't know, a musician who was really into conspiracy theories on Twitter?
Robbie Williams.
So we were saying that might be a good way to actually package it up. So we took this idea of this game where you're essentially the PR assistant to this sort of country music star. We had a bunch of genres in mind. We settled on country music for obvious reasons. And, essentially the idea is that you have this sort of Garth Brooks style character who's like coming back for a musical comeback trying to win a Grammy. But his PR team have just realized, they've just given him a Twitter account, and they didn't realize he goes off the wall talking about conspiracy theories left, right, and center. So like, in order to like preserve his public image, they bring you in and say, here, you gotta stop him from like tweeting these crazy things, because you're gonna cost us the Grammy. So he's contractually obliged to run all those tweets by you before he posts them. So for instance, there's one level where he has to do a tribute show to his friend who has died, and this is a great opportunity for him to get some sympathy votes. But he wants to go up on stage and say that his friend was killed by the FBI for speaking out against the government and such. So your job is to get him to not do that, and essentially you have to do all the critical thinking skills that we've found in our other research, lateral reading, checking your sources, and you have to come back and convince him, no, I get what you're saying, but this is all the reasons why you can't say that. And if you're not convincing, he ignores you and just tweets it anyway and ends both your careers. But if not, you can actually get them to, persuade him to look good on the internet. And the interesting thing we want to do is that sometimes he's right. Sometimes he actually is onto something. And if you don't spot the conspiracy, you actually end him getting him into deep water as well. So you can have him collaborating with people who are doing insider trading or very sketchy things. So the idea is that we wanted to put this in this kind of game that might be a little more engaging and fun to play, and something you could do without actually having to mention the word conspiracy. Because before, it's like, take this educational intervention to get better at spotting conspiracy theories. Well, here it's just play this game. Yeah. And something that people are more likely to do out of their own volition, and something that might be actually more engaging for conspiracy theorists who have that kind of itch to kind of do this sort of detective work. We hope that we could package a game that would kind of scratch that itch.
Yeah, and it's not just a simple, like, quiz-based game or something like that, or fill in the gaps game. It's like, it's got storytelling and world building in it, and I kind of love the storytelling that you've come up with. It's very vivid. I look forward to the Pedro Pascal interpretation of it in future. And I mean, you're from the Institute of Strategic Dialogue, Ciaran, so I'm going to challenge you on, like, how do we have strategic, productive dialogue with people who are spouting some of the Muppet philosophy that Katrina referred to?
I really think it can be difficult, but I really think you need empathy at the center of any engagement you're having, especially with friends or family, loved ones we have who are engaging in conspiratorial thinking at the dinner table or going a bit mad on Facebook or what it might be. Kind of broadening that out a bit, what that means in reality, I think, is maintaining contact as much as possible on perhaps the safer topics, if you both like Manchester United or if you both like a certain band or whatever it's going to be, as long as you believe that Manchester United aren't being governed by the deep state or something, or something like that. But maintaining that kind of connection then can, I think, create the potential entry points for then asking more probing questions. If they raise a particular point about whatever it might be, some political topic, and you can go, but why do you think that? And maybe touch upon some of the kind of resources that Cian talked about. But it's incredibly difficult because, as we've talked about, conspiracy theories are elastic, they're self-sealing, there's always more information that can be used to buttress the beliefs, especially now where the worlds that the worlds that we occupy are so insulated from each other that it can be very, very difficult. And in conducting research around this, you see it very clearly in the kinds of narratives that the journeys people go on from questioning the efficacy of masks or lockdowns, which we can all be critical or skeptical about, but in the online platforms where it's more surreality than reality for some, the kind of echo chambers in there means there's very little critical dialogue happening, there's no gatekeeping happening on facts and figures and things like this, and it's more just self-sealing in every sense of the way, so it's very difficult.
Yeah. Now, I'm definitely going to come to the audience for some questions next, so if you can put your hand up and wait for a microphone to come to you to ask a question, there'll be space for that. But before I wrap up, I've also heard, just talking around this idea of, solutions, interventions and things like that to try and safeguard ourselves against the spread of these things. I've heard as well that making sure that people have a community outside of, because we did mention that QAnon became a community of people, and for some people it was their only community because they actually became ostracized from their other communities by believing in this. So, losing people that way is just creating more of an entrenchment of those views. And I do find, like we were talking about factors of vulnerability, everyone is probably feeling very vulnerable right now with what's happening in the news, which is, things that are being orchestrated by states and actors, and people in power seem to be ineffective in preventing it. But civic action, getting involved in communities and things like that, apparently is a good thing to do in these cases, because it will help you realize that yes, there are bad things in the world, but there are things that you can trust and put faith in. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think that's the case, where you're touching on something really interesting there, that a lot of people who join these kind of groups, particularly like these conspiracy forums and such, are kind of looking for a sense of community, a sense of belonging, and a sense of certainty, and a bit of power as well to fight back. This idea, if you're discovering the truth, you have a bit of power to fight back against the system that's trying to influence you. And I think it's really interesting, that notion that you can take that urge and funnel into something a little more productive, where you get involved in community action and you get involved in helping people. But there is that kind of suspicion of, as you were saying there, states and such are actually engaging some malicious behavior. And that's the case too, where sometimes some bit of conspiracy ideation isn't completely unwarranted, but sometimes you just have to have more of a realistic view on what that entails. So I think getting involved in community action and such gives you that sense of community, but also gives you a tangible sense that you're actually doing something that's going to make a difference and actually solve a lot of the problems that you're perceiving in the world.
Yeah. Now we're definitely going to have loads of questions, so I'm just going to ask if everyone could be as brief as possible and we can get to as many as we can. Sorry. Oh, yeah, we have a mic over here, so we'll go straight to you.
Hello. You said earlier that everybody is a potential involved in this area, but I wonder, does the research show any difference in how young males and young females respond in this environment, and if it's in any way connected with the pattern we're seeing in voting, for example, in Germany in the last election, where males skewed right and females skewed left?
Excellent question.
It's really interesting. Actually, we find that while there's a bit of a stereotype that conspiracy theories are more of a right-leaning phenomenon, you actually see that both aisles of the political spectrum actually endorse conspiracy theories fairly to the same extent. The nature of the conspiracy theories changes a bit depending on what your political ideation is, but there are most people actually all have the propensity to believe conspiracy conspiracy theories. You'll see that men tend to believe more in these kind of manosphere-type conspiracy theories for obvious reasons. They're more likely to endorse more kind of misogynistic kind of conspiracy beliefs. You find that left-leaning people are more likely to endorse conspiracy theories about corporations and such, while like right-leaning people are more likely to endorse kind of conspiracy theories about the government, X, Y, Z. But you'll see that like, in terms of just generally your propensity to believe conspiracy theories, that actually there isn't much difference between right-wing and left-wing, but the difference in the type of conspiracies you believe in is dependent on what your background is.
Interesting. We have another over here, this gentleman.
Thank you. That's a really interesting discussion. And I think the information as being the most important thing in our world today is a huge thing. So we're interested here in getting a true idea of what's happening. I think we're in real danger. We're in an echo chamber here. There's only a handful of people here believe in conspiracy theories. Guys, you're looking around you, and you're talking about Epstein as if it was a conspiracy theory. Look into Epstein. It's crazy stuff. Clinton met this guy 100 times or something. So the degree to which the very rich have taken control of our world, and they're able to do extremely brutal things. Like, most people are dead against shooting people in line, queuing for food. But the mainstream media is reflecting the Labour Party and other. Our institutions have been captured by, call it what you like, but you can look at the confluence of wealth where it is. So sorry, my question is, do you think that you're in an echo chamber here?
Yes.
Yeah. That's an interesting question, right? It's this idea that, like, what we were doing with our research is we were very interested in looking at the general public. So there's kind of two populations you can look at when you're looking at conspiracy theories in academic research. You can look at conspiracy forums made up of people who self-identify as conspiracy theorists and such. And you can actually just look at the general public as well to see how everybody kind of falls on their conspiracy ideation. A huge tenet of our research is the idea that some level of conspiracy ideation is warranted. And there's kind of a spectrum between believing all conspiracy theories, regardless of their content, and disbelieving all conspiracy theories, regardless of their content. And we posit that there's some kind of area in the middle where there's an ideal level of critical thinking being utilized. So people usually think of people being as non-conspiracy theorists, conspiracy theorists. But really it's people who are blind skeptics who reject all conspiracy theories, and people who believe all conspiracy theories. And both ends of the spectrum have some lapses in critical thinking, because in some situations, as you were saying, there are conspiracy theories that are worth considering and are worth entertaining. And in others, there are situations where their conspiracy theories just have no grounding in truth or information. So really what we're kind of looking at in our research is finding ways that we can optimize people's skills to identify when these sort of patterns happen, where conspiracy theories are likely to be occurring, versus being able to distinguish when something might be unreasonable.
So yeah, the discernment of likely versus unlikely. Oh, we're going to have to move on because we do have more questions. And yeah, we're going to have to move on, sir, because we do have other people who have questions here. And oh, yes.
I was at a Burning Man event recently, and I was talking to an Israeli Jewish lady who had rejoined the IDF after October the 7th. And we talked for a good few hours late into the night. But what she believed was that she believed everything about October the 7th, which originally came out about 40 beheaded babies and mass rapes everywhere. And originally, that actually came out in the New York Times, but as far as I know, was later widely debunked. However, she continued to believe that, which is very interesting. She also believed that the IDF were the most moral army in the world, and there was no genocide at all. But this is the conspiracy theory, I think. She believed that the whole Western world was being propagandized, being paid for by Qatar and other Muslim countries. We were being propagandized into believing all these falsities about Israel. I'm just asking you to, I don't know where you are in this. I think most experts in the world genocide experts do actually believe there is a real genocide going on right now, and that most humanitarian organizations believe the same thing. That's what I believe. I could be wrong. How would you convince this lady that the Qatari government is not propagandizing, is not paying off the whole of the Western media to make us believe that there's really a genocide in Israel when there isn't? How would you convince her?
I suppose to make it broader, just to be generous to the rest of the audience, it is like, how do you address someone with a theory that there is this really grand conspiracy, and no matter what you put, what evidence you put in front of them, they just kind of push back?
Exactly, and people's beliefs, perhaps, that support their argument, their beliefs are based on the totality of their life, the community they've grown up in, the media that they have consumed that has shaped their lives, their friends, their family around them, so that whilst you may not support or agree with someone's beliefs, perhaps we can understand a little better what has shaped the kinds of building blocks around them. And then even a bit more specifically, if you take claims like Qatar funding news across the world, there can be a grain of truth in these kind of things, because for something like that, Qatar has significant funding in Al Jazeera, and they might make that kind of argument that there is funding of news organizations there, even though the news organization might be far removed from the state, and things like this as well, where people can draw upon a grain of truth to build upon a wider narrative. And you see that all the time in conspiracy theories, that the content and the claims may change, but the tropes and the building blocks are so often the same.
Yeah, and you see that, like, again, when we were looking at research and critical thinking, you do see that it's not just a problem of critical thinking, but it's also other aspects like your social background and your political ideology and such. And you find that, like, those will mediate the others. So if you've low critical thinking skills, you're more likely to entertain unreasonable conspiracies. If you have high levels of political ideation that support the conspiracy, you're more likely to believe in them. But both of them will interact with each other too. Right. So you find that, like, if you have strong political motivations to believe in something and you tend to have lower cognitive ability, you're the most likely to endorse these conspiracy theories. And the problem there is that, like, it's no longer a problem of tackling conspiracy theories when something is part of someone's self-concept of their ideology. So if I have a reason to believe this misinformation, giving me information that contradicts this is not going to be enough to change my mind. There's a bigger thing at play here. I want to believe this is true for personal reasons, for reasons for community and such. So I'm going to find ways to take this new information and still make it work, because for me to believe the information, the conspiracy I believe isn't true, will have to make me question bigger things about myself, my self-identity, my group, and such. So you see there's like an incentive, or what we call motivated reasoning, for people to indulge in conspiracy theories if it fits with a larger kind of political ideology, or like a sense of self or a sense of belonging.
It's not dissimilar to people who get involved in cults. I mean, it's because they've got a sense of identity built around a belief. It's very, very hard to come against that, and that's why deprogramming people is actually something left to specialists a lot of the time. And we have a question up the back. Oh, we're out of time. Sorry. But thank you so much for coming and being so attentive.